This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa, our top stories this morning. The International Criminal Court faces a backlash against its move to seek arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and Hamas leader on war crimes charges. Succession plans in focus for major Middle East nations, with the Iranian president's death and ill health for the Saudi king. Plus, the stock rally takes a breather as focus turns to Nvidia earnings for a check on the resilience of the AI frenzy. Well, good morning again. It's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Joumanna Bercetche in Dubai. As ever, let's get you caught up on how some of these major markets have been faring in the overnight session. At first, we're going to start with the MSCI Asia Pacific Index, and you can see we are actually tilting lower today, down about 0.7%, coming after 7 days of gains. And what we're seeing today is a little bit of weakness transpire in Hong Kong tech stocks. We will talk more about that shortly with Avril. S&P futures also leaning sideways. Big event coming up this week, of course, that is Nvidia earnings. Yesterday, we got some downward pressure from the KBW index. That's the banking index. Its biggest slide since mid-April. Some commentary from Jamie Dimon sending that index lower. We will talk more about that on the show. 10-year U.S. Treasuries 4.44, trading sideways today, and then Brent is ever a focus. Again, slightly weaker in the session today, down 0.5%. I want to draw your attention to one asset in particular. We spoke about it yesterday, but I want to bring it up again today, and that is the chart of gold. And what we're seeing there is that bullion is at an all-time high. So record rally for gold. And of course, some of the factors contributing are expectations of Fed cuts coming through this year, the disinflationary environment, and the prospect for weaker USD, in addition to, of course, the gold being a safe haven asset. So all of that has contributed to gold trending higher. But for now, let's check in on how markets in Asia are faring. Avril Hong is standing by in our Singapore studio, and it doesn't look like a pretty day in Asia, Avril.
Not pretty at all. We're actually seeing Asia stock benchmarks mostly lower, and the declines really being seen on the Hang Seng. Now, this is a day where it's not just the earnings story that's coming through, it's also the unwinding of the material stock rally from yesterday. Today, the sector is among those that are underperforming, and investors also grappling with all that Fed speak. Think about how Loretta Mester is saying, we might not see those 3 rate cuts this year. So the stock benchmarks mostly lower, but in Japan, we're seeing a bit of gains. And let's flip the board because I want to show you why. It is the Japanese insurers that are helping to lift things there. Double-digit gains on the likes of MS and AD after it showed that positive outlook for earnings. It's announcing share buyback. So these are among the insurers that are gaining in Japan. But going the other direction, it is, as you alluded to earlier, the likes of the EV makers, Li Auto, sales miss, showing how the intense competition in China is really biting. We also have Xpeng that is set to report today. So that's another one that we'll be watching, Joumanna.
Well, big moves there in EV space. Avril, thank you for flagging to us. Now, returning to our top story today, the backlash against the International Criminal Court's move against Israeli and Hamas leaders over the war in Gaza.
The outrageous decision by the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, to seek arrest warrants against the democratically elected leaders of Israel is a moral outrage of historic proportions.
These applications for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas.
So let's get you up to speed on this story. The ICC's chief prosecutor will seek arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netayahu and Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar on war crimes charges. A panel of judges will consider the application. Now, while Israel and the United States have both condemned the move, the Belgian foreign minister posted on X that it is an important step in the investigation of the situation in Palestine. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Stuart Livingston-Wallace, who heads our Middle East, North Africa, and Russia coverage. Let me just start off by asking you what exactly the ICC is accusing these leaders of.
War crimes. And that's a pretty serious charge. And again, it's giving an equivalence between the Hamas leaders, which is obviously a terrorist organization, according to most countries, and the democratically elected leaders of Israel.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's causing a lot of the outrage. Now, it must also be said that there are some limits here to the potential impact. Yes, it's got 124 signatories, but the reality is if you look at a map of how much land mass is not part of this court, it's most of the world. So, yes, it does cause problems. Yes, it's embarrassing. But fundamentally, it doesn't mean that they get arrested overnight.
I also think the wording here is significant because the prosecutor is looking to get an arrest warrant. So what does that actually mean in practice? What happens next?
So it goes in front of a panel of 3 judges, which I think at the moment is, there's a Mexican judge, Benin, and I've forgotten the other one. But then they're going to weigh that up. Now, obviously, they're going to come under enormous pressure from some of the world powers in terms of that decision. So I hesitate to say it might be politically swayed, but I mean, that's certainly the impression that you get from the outside. And then after that, that goes out to the signatories, and in theory, if any of these people that finally have a warrant under their name land on their territory, in theory, they're supposed to arrest them. Now, again, in practice, that has not really happened in the past.
Right, so it's difficult for them to ultimately enforce. So at the end of the day, is it performative, essentially, what the ICC have come out with?
Well, I mean, I think from the point of view of Hamas, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. I mean, I don't think that they were going to be travelling to Canada or South America anytime soon. For in the case of Netayahu, then, yes, it is probably more serious. Now, he can still travel to the US, but obviously he can't go to large swathes of Europe, for instance. He can still come to the Middle East. He can still go to most of Asia. He can still go to, a large bit of North America, i.e. the US. So, again, I think would be embarrassing for him. It's awkward for him, but it doesn't basically keep him on the house arrest.
Will it change the course of the war?
I doubt it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty clear. The War Cabinet, in its current form, has said we have one goal, which is to eliminate the Hamas leadership. They haven't wavered in that. And if you think of all the different pressures they've come under, including from the US president, including from a temporary pause on US arms sales, they have continued regardless. So it doesn't feel like a warrant from the ICC would necessarily change that.
Yeah. Stuart, thanks for joining me. That was Bloomberg's Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, who heads our Middle East, North Africa and Russia coverage. Now, Mara Rudman is a former senior U.S. national security advisor and joins us now from Doha. Good morning to you, Mara. I'm sure you heard the conversation I was having with my colleague Stuart over here. Let me just ask you your take on the ICC judgment yesterday and whether you think it's going to have broader ramifications.
Well, first, on the actual move by the prosecutor, I would very much support and endorse what President Biden said. And I would also say it's one of the reasons the United States has not been, and I think will not be anytime soon, a member country in the International Criminal Court. It's not only highly politicized as a process, but it is just plain wrong to equate the actions of Israel's leadership, democratically elected leadership, however much I may disagree with them, with a terrorist leader in Yahya Sinwar, who is single-handedly responsible for everything that has happened since October 7th, because of what he executed, how he executed, and the heartless way he is treating the civilian population of Gaza while he hides deep in tunnels underground.
What about the charges leveled against the Israeli Prime Minister with respect to hampering the supply of humanitarian assistance into the Gaza Strip?
Again, I have big issues with those charges. I do not think there's a factual basis for them. While you can believe, as I do, that not enough aid has gone in by any means for Palestinians in Gaza, and also see it as wildly incorrect to charge the leader of Israel in the ICC with purposely causing famine. I point out a couple things on this. First, one of my former positions was working to get maximum amounts of goods and assistance into Gaza pre-conflict in President Biden's and President Obama's administration. And it is not an easy task to do so without having a large amount off the top taken by Hamas. And this was in the 2010, 2011, 2012 period, when they were frankly probably taking a good percentage of the concrete, for example, that was going in to build their tunnels. So it's not an easy job. And I would say on top of that, we have reports that the assistance that the U.S. is first trying to get in from its offshore peer has met with a huge amount of difficulty as well. And it is not, it would not be surprising to me for Hamas to be behind that.
clear from your perspective. Let me just ask you about the other things that are occurring in the Middle East right now. There is a lot going on, and of course, we had the shocking accident and death of President Raisi over the weekend. Let me ask you if you think the change of the president, the changing of the guard within Iran is going to have broader ramifications on the region as well. How do you see the change in leadership in Iran at the presidential level likely to impact some of the relationships within the Middle East?
Well, listen, everybody throughout the world, not just in the Middle East, is watching and will continue to be watching very closely the transition that is occurring in Iran. And it is less about, I believe, expecting a significant change in the type of leader. We know that that the president who was killed in this helicopter crash, President Raisi, was very conservative, was very likely being groomed to take over for the supreme leader. So the supreme leader, Khomeini, is 85 years old. So there is a need, and I think he probably recognizes the need to appoint someone who can be his successor or can be groomed for that role. There's a lot of rumors now that that may well be his son, who is probably one of the candidates who is looking at, in addition to the president before that. And it will certainly need to be someone who is agreed to by Iran's Revolutionary Guard that perpetrates a lot of its horrendous actions through the region. But it's at a time of also tremendous political instability inside Iran and political challenges. So again, the world will be watching closely. Do not expect a difference in the nature or tone of the person succeeding, but it is a time of great instability.
Many people are saying that we will likely look to get a continuity candidate simply because the supreme leader will pick someone who eventually will be on the pathway to become supreme leader himself. Another story, again, that we're watching, there's so much going on here, is the state of King Salman's health in Saudi Arabia. He's been admitted to hospital, and there's lots of speculation about the state of his health. I do wonder what you think his passing, should it come to happen, what that would mean for the calculus of the region, especially given all of these reports that Saudi Arabia very close to inking a defense deal with the U.S. and a potential pathway to normalization with Israel.
So King Salman has been in ill health for some period of time. I think in back and forth degrees. But some of King Salman's health issues, really from the time I think very close to the time he ascended to the top position, have led to some of the very strong positioning of the Crown Prince, one of his many sons, but the most favorite son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And so MBS, as he is known, has really been in a position of strong leadership of Saudi Arabia, short of being the king, for some period of time. And so I would expect and anticipate that all the conversations that have been occurring thus far, most of which have been through Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, would continue. And so I would think there also great continuity, though I would note that it is a real passing of the generational leadership of Saudi Arabia in a very significant way should King Salman pass.
Yeah, and moving to the younger generation now. Mara, it's wonderful to have you on. We were lucky to get you passing through Doha, former senior U.S. National Security Advisor in Doha this morning. Well, we're just getting some news from Tasnim, which is the semi-official Iranian state agency, and they're saying that Iran will be holding presidential elections on June the 28th. We spoke about this yesterday. Now that the VP has taken on interim presidential responsibilities, they had a 50-day window to set the elections. It's been set for June the 28th. Also reading that candidates will have the opportunity to register to be in the race between May 30th to June the 3rd, after which, of course, the Guardian Council will evaluate all of the candidates and see who makes it to that final round. So June 28th is going to be the date for Iranian elections. Now, still ahead, we will talk investment strategy with FAB Global Markets as traders digest the latest Fed speak and look ahead to NVIDIA's earnings. This is Bloomberg.
I was on the record before saying I was at the median, which was 3. The developments I've seen in the economy right now, I would not think that that's still appropriate because the inflation risks have moved up.
I do think that our new steady state is likely to be higher than what people have known over the last decade. Maybe back to where we were in the 1990s and 2000s, but we'll just have to see.
Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic and Cleveland's Loretta Mester on the central bank's rate path. Now, let's bring in Majd Dola, Equity Portfolio Manager at FAP Global Markets. Always good to hear what some of the Fed officials have to say. Interesting, though, that Mester is saying that 3 cuts are now unlikely at this point. Bostic saying that it is likely that rates end up at a higher rate than where they have been in the last decade. A neutral rate probably more similar to where we were in the 90s than where we were in the last decade. What does that mean for the trajectory of equities?
Absolutely. And if you remember, as we enter 2024, we had this idea that inflation is going to go down very quickly. And then obviously, it turns out to be kind of unlikely. Inflation turns out to be a sticky one. And then that's why we saw some pushback from Fed on when and how many rate cuts we're going to have this year. And last week, CPI was a testament to how market is nervous about inflation. That's why a small beat in CPI took market to all-time highs.
Do you think that reaction was warranted last week? Because it was a minor beat and only on an annualized basis. And yet all of the market participants cheered it on. And it feels like the Fed now, some Fed officials have been pushing back against that optimism.
Yeah, because, like I said, market waiting for CPI to turn around, back down, and we saw that in last week. Is the jump is warranted? The direction is right, I believe, but maybe the speed, as usual, is not justified, and this is what happened in the equity market. And that's why going forward in the next couple of weeks with the Fed official pushing back a little bit on market, that could create a rebalancing of risk again.
What do you think is going to drive this next leg higher in equity performance? Because valuations are sitting close to the rich side.
Absolutely. So the main drivers for equity has been since COVID, Fed and monetary policy, corporate earnings, and obviously, the AI frenzy, and we believe all of them continue to be intact. Corporate earnings this quarter was good, and we continue to post a record profit for the S&P 500. Monetary policy, the rate is behind us, so we are looking at cuts instead of anything else. So that's good. That's supportive for market. And, we continue to hear from tech company how they're going to invest in AI and how much they're going to spend on the cloud business and so on and so forth. So all this, I think it's a right mix for equity, and that's good for both markets.
What do you think is the biggest risk for equities here? Is it higher inflation or is it slower growth?
I think slower growth. I think inflation could, maybe consolidate around these levels and try to turn back down. I think we might have a surprise, and this is a tail risk, obviously, in terms of growth. I think a U.S. election and stability in the U.S. election might be a tail risk, and obviously here in the region, we have a lot of, risk that's need to be watched very carefully.
Yeah, the geopolitical risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we talk about geopolitical risk, I just want to turn to the big event this week for stock investors, and that's NVIDIA earnings, the last of the Magnificent Seven to report. It's been the darling of the Magnificent Seven of the S&P, poised to actually become the largest company by market cap in the U.S. Do you think there's too much hype in the stock?
Absolutely. It's been a crazy ride in NVIDIA. To your point, tomorrow's earnings not going to change the picture. Whether they're going to miss or beat, at the end of the day, it's just a sell-side estimates. The picture is still positive for NVIDIA. And similar to what we saw a couple months ago with Apple, the stock was disappointing, had a decent drop, and then the stock back up. And this has created an opportunity for investors. So if, for example, NVIDIA missed on that day or investor took it negatively, that could be a...
Buy the dip.
Yes, absolutely.
What sectors are you involved in right now?
So we like growth across sectors. So you can find it across tech, obviously, although tech start to be quite expensive. And when we say tech, you have the software, cybersecurity, a lot of companies that's under the radar. You can find decent valuation with decent growth profile. Restaurants, healthcare, so a lot of sectors, you have to cherry pick stocks within those sectors.
Okay, let me go back to what you said earlier about some of the political risks. U.S. elections coming up, geopolitical risks, obviously very escalated right now in the region. How do you hedge for that? How are you hedging against the possibility of a bigger blow up in these risks?
I mean, personally, in FAB or in global markets, we are long short, so we do take some short bets on the market. So this is how we hedge. We hedge through options. We always take into consideration the tail risk, although the probability of the risk goes up and down, depends on how the situation is. So this is as far as us, but you can always hedge with, the traditional hedge assets, for example, gold, and that's why you continue to see
gold is at an all-time high.
Yeah, because a lot of people are using it as a hedge against what could happen in the next couple of months.
Yeah, makes sense. So people are bullish risk, but at the same time cognizant of risk, which is why the gold safe haven is doing quite well.
Yeah.
All right, Mash, it was great having you on the show. Mash Dola, Equity Portfolio Manager at FAB Global Markets. Thank you. Also coming up, Jamie Dimon's succession plans, that and the stock reaction next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joumanna Bercetche in Dubai. Now for a look at some other stories that we're following this morning. JP Morgan shares slid in New York after the CEO Jamie Dimon said the bank is well on the way with its succession plans. Dimon told shareholders the timetable was not 5 years anymore after he was asked about how long he would remain in charge. Dimon has held the top job at the bank since 2006 and is about halfway through a 5-year retention package.
I have the energy that I've always had. That's important. I think when I can't put the jersey on and give it full thing, I should leave, basically. The board probably, it's up to them at the time. Will I stay as chairman for a while? We'll see. But I think and we're on the way. I mean, we're moving people around.
Sent the stock much lower yesterday and the KPW index. Coming up, we're going to be talking oil and the OPEC Plus meeting. We'll be right back. This is Horizons Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. The International Criminal Court faces a backlash against its move to seek arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and Hamas leader on war crimes charges. Succession plans in focus for major Middle East nations with the Iranian president's death and ill health for the Saudi king. Plus, the stock rally takes a breather as focus turns to Nvidia earnings for a check on the resilience of the AI frenzy. And it's just gone 8:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Joumanna Bercetche in Dubai. A quick check on how markets are faring. We're seeing a bit of a dip in some of these Asian stocks today, down about 0.8%. Some weakness transpiring in Hong Kong tech stocks. Ava will give us the latest. Some EV names also coming under pressure in the Asian session. S&P futures trading sideways. We are through 5,300, so close to all-time highs as we head into that all-important Nvidia's earnings report tomorrow. 10-year yield sitting at around 4.44%. We drifted slightly higher in yesterday's session, and then Brent also trading weaker today at around $83. Gold also in focus. The bullion making an all-time high. We talk about safe haven currencies, money going into safe haven assets, but it is not just gold. We also talk about silver reaching an all-time high, copper as well, an industrial metal, also seeing a lot of demand, some supply concerns also affecting there. This as the market starts to price in further interest rate cuts out of the Fed and weakness in US dollar for the rest of the year. All of that contributes to the support in gold. Right, let's check in on how markets in Asia are faring as well. Avril Hong is in our Singapore studio. Avril. All right, so we are having a few technical difficulties with Avril, but as we just flagged, there is some weakness coming through in some of these Hong Kong tech stocks. Earlier on the show, Avril was talking about the weakness coming through in some of the Chinese EV makers as well. So something to bear in mind. It is not a pretty session or a pretty handover from Asian markets this morning. But returning to our top geopolitical story, the backlash against the International Criminal Court's move against Israeli and Hamas leaders of the war in Gaza.
The outrageous decision by the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, to seek arrest warrants against the democratically elected leaders of Israel is a moral outrage of historic proportions.
We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas.
So let's catch you up with the latest on this story. The ICC's chief prosecutor will seek arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netayahu and Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar on war crimes charges. A panel of judges will consider the application. While Israel and the United States have both condemned the move, the Belgian foreign minister posted on X that it is an important step in the investigation of the situation in Palestine. Paul Wallace, our Middle East economy and government editor, joins us to discuss what this means, but essentially it is a big deal that the ICC are accusing not just Hamas leaders, but the Prime Minister of Israel of committing war crimes.
Hi, Joumanna. Yes, that is the case. We don't know how the ICC judges will react to this submission for arrest warrants, and that's quite an important step that has to go ahead. But yes, the chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, is saying that he believes Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu himself and the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, have committed war crimes, and some Hamas leaders as well, including Yahya Sinwar. And this wasn't a total surprise, but it was something that Israel was trying to prevent, and it was lobbying very hard, especially in the West, to try and get Western countries and allies to put pressure on the ICC to stop it. It's very clear that whilst this type of move probably won't in and of itself stop the war in Gaza, it's not meaningless. It does have a lot of significance for Netanyahu himself and the Israeli state. So there could be repercussions. What those repercussions would be if there were arrest warrants issued, we don't know yet, but potentially they could be big.
Well, you know, we were speaking to a former U.S. National Security Advisor early on the show, and she was saying that what she takes issue with is this equivalence, the fact that both Hamas, who obviously committed the horrific attacks on October 7, and Israel have been issued for an arrest warrant. And I think, you know, that subject of equivalence and false equivalence is something that has come up in many of the international community's responses. You know, we heard from the White House, Biden rejects it, Secretary of State saying that this is they outright reject the statement issued by the prosecutor's office. So to what extent do you think the decision is shaping the international community's response at this point?
I think that that idea that there's some sort of moral equivalence between what Hamas is doing and what the IDF is doing in Gaza is something that Israel's Western allies, or many of them, especially the US, are very much against, and they just do not believe this is something that the ICC should go ahead with. We've got to see what actually happens from now. Obviously, there's still due process. The US is not a signatory to the ICC. It doesn't mean it has no leverage whatsoever. It is obviously still the world superpower that it is. But Karim Khan is saying and essentially making out that he is not going to be swayed by any pressure, and that he thinks this is a very important issue, and that Israel, as well as the leaders of Hamas, has questions to answer, and they should do so in a tribunal.
Yeah. Let's just turn to the other big story of the week, and of course, that is the situation in Iran. We now know that Iran are going to be holding presidential elections on June the 28th for Tasnim, the semi-official state agency. So there is going to be a window for candidates to put their names forward. How do we see the race shaping up at this point, or is it too early to say?
It's still very early. We now know that the president, at least on an interim basis, is the person who was vice president beforehand, or first vice president Mohammed Mokber. We don't know if he will run. There is a feeling among Iran analysts that the clerical establishment and the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, will do what they can to ensure another conservative, someone of a similar ilk to Ebrahim Raisi, who was killed in the helicopter crash, gets in, so that there's continuity. That's the feeling, but that will, the next thing to watch will be which candidates come forward and which ones are actually allowed to stand in the election.
I guess a lot of questions about whether we might end up with a more moderate, so to speak, like Rouhani, or are we going to stick to this ultra-conservative hard line that has come to the fore in the last couple of years? That is going to be the big question. Paul?
Exactly.
Thank you so much. That was Paul Wallace, our Middle East economy and government editor. Now, oil is trading lower for a second day, showing signs of weakness as rising tensions in the Middle East and Ukraine fail to spark any significant price action. So let's bring in our senior energy reporter, Stephen Safinsky. Stephen, I've got to say, I really would have thought, given the events in Iran over the weekend, the fact that Iran, of course, has been saddled by sanctions, that we would see more of an impact on the price of where oil is trading. That's not happening.
Yeah, I think the market was expecting, or at least when I spoke with traders leading up to the oil markets open, there was this expectation that perhaps we would see fireworks. We would see prices kind of jump, or we would see some sort of volatility, but that didn't really pan out. What's happening in Iran, as well as the health of Saudi Arabia's king, both of those situations have no actual impact on physical supply of oil, especially since Iran's state media was quick to show that this was an accident, what was happening in the country. And for Saudi Arabia's case, Crown Prince MBS has been running the show. So there really is no shift in policy there, despite a symbolic move of him becoming king.
Well, we do have the OPEC Plus meeting coming up, but I would like you to just set the stage for us from a supply-demand perspective. There's I've been reading a lot of commentary about inventory stockpiles, and that is one part of the market that the OPEC Plus cartel can actually lean on should they need to provide the market with more oil supply. Is that a factor that we need to take into consideration heading into the next meeting?
Yeah, I think absolutely. When you look at, so let's take a step back, right? So there's the OPEC Plus meeting that's on June 1st. That is what clearly the market is focused on, not so much what's happening in Iran and Saudi Arabia or the Middle East. They're clearly focused on waiting for an outcome from this meeting. Now, this meeting, they're going to be discussing whether or not to extend production cuts into the third quarter. They've had them in place for the first and second quarter. You're going to be there, so you're going to be reporting all the nitty-gritty coming out of that meeting. But I think it will be something that will, that is going to drive the market. It's going to drive the narrative because, as you said, there is a situation where maybe the market is softer. Maybe there is a bit stronger oil production out of the U.S. than was expected. How did they balance that at the same time? Where are global inventories? And then you look at demand. How is Chinese demand shaping up? And when you look at it all together, you can kind of get a hint of where the market expects things. There's been a reduction in sort of the bullish bets by money managers when you look at the data. So people are sort of taking their foot off the gas. And you can also see that with the volatility index as well. Volatility has dropped for Brent to the lowest level since 2019. So we're sort of treading water until we have some more news out of OPEC in the next few weeks.
Let me ask you a question about positioning and what people are doing, because we just showed a chart there of how the oil volatility index has been dropping. The same you could say for the VIX. So this is a global phenomenon, not specific to oil. I just wonder what people have been doing in this environment. You briefly mentioned that you've seen a trimming of long positions. Would you say that most of the long positioning has been cleaned out at this point?
I don't think they've all been cleaned out per se. But when you're looking at other, there are other sorts of other ways to look at this. For example, Brent's prompt spread has narrowed to its smallest backwardation since January, which is also sort of indicating that the market is kind of taking again some of this. They're looking at the bullishness is sort of being erased from the market. Now, does that mean that people are expecting prices to fall? Not so much. I really do think it is a wait and see situation, especially since the market you could describe the market as pretty well balanced as well. So with all that together, I think it really is the ball is in OPEC Plus's court to see whether or not they extend their cuts. If they don't, if they add more oil to the market, you could probably see things trend lower, and then you do see the last of those bears exit at that point.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, throw one thing out there that we also need to bear in mind as we head into OPEC Plus. ABS, you mentioned, Saudi energy minister is also the son of King Salman. So we're keeping a close eye, of course, on the health of King Salman in Saudi Arabia. It could also have ramifications on that OPEC Plus meeting that you mentioned on June the 1st. Stephen Sepchinsky, our senior energy reporter, thank you for joining. Also coming up on our show, more on oil, as our next guest expects Brent crude to fall to $70 in the second half of this year. Why? Well, we'll find out soon. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joumanna Bercetche in Dubai. Well, oil is trading lower for a second day, showing signs of weakness ahead of an OPEC Plus meeting on supply. Our next guest expects Brent crude to fall to $70 in the second half of this year. Let's bring in Amol Shitole, head of fixed income at Mashreq Capital. Amol, wonderful to have you with us. I know you're a fixed income specialist, but I've got to ask you about your oil views. Why do you see oil trending lower, and why do you have $70 as your target?
Absolutely. Good morning. Thanks for having me, first of all. We expect oil market to be in surplus going into the second half. Right now, it's well supplied. But if you look at the demand concerns around the world, they're valid. We're talking about non-OPEC supply as well, which is rising consistently. Geopolitical risk premium at this point in time is going lower as well. And if you add spare capacity at OPEC Plus, we're talking about 5 to 6 million barrels a day. That's a lot of spare capacity in play as well. So those are the factors which make us a little cautious going into the second half. If you look at the latest IEA report as well, I mean, they're talking about lower demand for oil through a lower industrial activity in Europe. We're talking about mild winter in Europe as well. And if you look at global inventory picture at this point in time, they're rising. That's not really bullish for oil, right?
Yeah.
If you look at U.S. Diesel deliveries, which is an important, a leading indicator for oil demand, that's falling to the first 4 months of this year as well. So if we put it all together, there is more reason to believe that we can see a softer oil price. If this trend continue, we can easily see $70 to $75 per barrel of average oil prices.
So to list them, increase in non-OPEC supply, spare capacity, IEA signaling lower demand, global inventory picking up, and then U.S. diesel deliveries all dropping. None of that paints a bullish picture. So let me ask you this, and nobody's talking about it. Is there a small possibility that OPEC Plus actually reduce production even further, take more barrels off the market?
I mean, it's a great question, but I think the possibility of that is slim at this point in time. If you look at Saudi, for example, they have huge capex needs to fund the giga projects, right?
That's true.
I mean, there's less chance for them to actually take it down. I mean, what they can do is simply extend the cuts, not only in the third quarter, but going into the second half as well. So we don't think that's a possibility at this point in time. If anything, at some point, they'll look to take some barrels, put those barrels back in market, to support their budgets. So having aggressive cuts from current level is less likely.
Yeah. Well, $70 oil barrel is going to be interesting for Saudi Arabia and the economy, but you're not an economist, so I'm not going to ask you that question. Let's just turn to markets. Assuming your view does play out and oil does drop to $70, that's disinflationary. I think it would be welcome for central bankers. What does that mean for your bread and butter for fixed income?
Well, the regional fixed income market is not something which benefits from lower oil prices, right? Having said that, the average credit quality of the GCC bond market is very solid. We're talking about A-rated fixed income universe here compared to BB plus for emerging market as such. And if you are selective and diversified, I think you can still play some of the themes. Especially we like rating upgrade candidates in MENA region. We are expecting Turkey to be a rating upgrade candidate going from single B to double B minus at some point. Egypt could move from B minus to B flat. We are also looking at Oman moving from HOI to IG over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
And some of the quasi-sovereign plays from Morocco, the fertilizer companies like OCP could move from double B plus to triple B minus. So there's some rising stars there as well. So there are opportunities if you're selected. Those spreads are tight.
Yeah, well, I spoke to the Turkish finance minister, Mr. Şimşek, last week, and he seems to emphasize that, this fiscal orthodoxy, monetary policy orthodoxy is here to stay. So that's probably music to investors' ears. Let me just ask you one final one. Our African correspondent has been giving us a preview into the South African elections that are taking place. How are you looking to play South Africa, if at all?
Well, election is in 8 or 10 days from now. We are neutral on South African hard currency as well as local currency bonds at this point in time. Though the sovereign bonds rated BB minus, they're trading more like single B story at this point in time. And the reason for that is increased political risk premium ahead of elections. We're also looking at weak fundamental trajectory for South Africa in general as well, right? I mean, we're talking about structurally low GDP growth in South Africa. We're talking about rising debt levels. We're talking about widening fiscal deficits. We're talking about weak SOEs. I think all of that would mean there could be a better entry point for these sovereign bonds at some point. However, on the local currency side, yield curves are steep. You can get involved on a hedge basis because it's a higher beta play compared to the dollar bonds. So all in all, though things are looking interesting from valuation standpoint, I think we'll wait for better entry points until we have election results in front of us.
Yeah, very clear. Amol, great to have you on, and thank you for giving us an overview of some of the local fixed income markets that he looks at. Amol Shitole, head of fixed income at Mashreq Capital. Also coming up, attempts to overthrow the government in the DRC have failed. We discuss the impact next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joumanna Bercetche in Dubai. Now, the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo says the leader of an attempted coup was killed on Sunday and several others arrested at gunfire after gunfire erupted in the capital. Joining us now from Kigali is Bloomberg's Ondira Oganga. Ondira, I've got to ask you, how did events leading up to the failed coup unfold?
Joumanna, what we know so far is that early morning hours on the 20th of May, assailants, about 50 of them armed, stormed various residences, including the Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, and also a politician tipped to become the next Speaker of the National Assembly. And the gunfire ensued, leaving 2 police officers dead. These assailants then proceeded to the office of the president, where then the Republican Guard took charge and neutralized the coup attempt. And there were several fatalities, including Christian Malanga. Now, Christian is the leader of the New Zaire movement, and he is a self-exiled leader who was in the U.S., and he's a very harsh critique of President Felix Tshisekedi. He's always said his administration is very corrupt and even threatened to overthrow his government in 2017 in a botched coup attempt. And this attempted coup comes at a very tricky time because you look at West Africa and Central Africa. They've gone through several coups in the last 5 years that have left democratic governments in shambles and installed military leaders who are gravitating farther and farther away from the West and leaning more rather towards China and Russia.
Right. But what are the ramifications? What is the read across to the DRC?
we need to understand that DRC is a very wealthy nation, $24 trillion worth of resources. They have the world's largest cobalt reserves, which is a key element in EV. They have copper, they have gold, they have diamond, which makes them a very strategic ally to the West and China, who are very big in mining. And so an attempt to overthrow the government poses a great risk to internal and external stability. This is a country that is on the cusp of completing an IMF review with the hope of buying themselves some form of credibility to the international market in the next 3 to 5 years. And so this is a wake-up call to President Felix Tshisekedi. He needs to fortify government. He needs to fortify security. 5 months since he was elected, they're yet to form a government because of internal wrangles. So they need to get their house in order, unless they will put at risk the very hard work that they've put in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so essentially resources rich, but political instability is going to be an issue there. Bloomberg's Ondiro Ganga, thank you for the latest. All right, before we head out, let us take a quick look at how some of the key markets are faring today. We are actually seeing equity futures in the U.S. trade sideways. So 5,333 is exactly where we're at for these futures, but not seen moving a lot in either direction. NASDAQ 100, similar theme, but of course everyone is watching out for those NVIDIA earnings coming out tomorrow. Could be a key barometer for where indices go from here onwards. Dow Jones also seen flattish. In terms of U.S. Treasuries, also keeping an eye on how fixed income is faring. We've moved slightly higher in the last couple of sessions. You can see the 10-year is sitting at 4.44. Not a lot of change today. The 2-year is about 1.3 basis points higher. But that is Horizons, Middle East and Africa. I'm Joumanna Bercetche in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.